Intentional camera movement. Most of the time, we understand that we are trying to keep the camera as still as possible in order to get a sharp image, or at least sharp in the right places. But what if we decide to intentionally move the camera, actually go with that blur? Maybe we can, if we do it right, we can get something which is interesting, or even abstractly beautiful. This is what today's podcast is about, episode 293. If you're watching live, leave a comment. If you're watching the recorded version, you can find all sorts of menu timestamps down below. But stick around and we can make a start. So yes, welcome to episode 293 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Today is all about the idea of intentional camera movement. So what do we mean by that? So in essence then, let's maybe just kind of do a quick screen share here. So I take a photo, here's some irises out in the garden, taken yesterday I think it was, or the day before, and the the shutter speed is too slow for what I'm trying to do. There's movement, there's blur, it's out of focus, no good, we throw it away. But what if I deliberately take this slow shutter speed and just move the camera, just a little kind of jerk upwards? Wrong one. Then what we get is something like this. Okay. I mean, it's maybe not award-winning, but perhaps it's slightly more interesting. Or maybe we slow it slightly, and now we've got some of these buttercups happening in the background as well. We're moving into the world of abstract. We're moving into the world of deliberate, purposeful, intentional camera movement, as opposed to the unintentional camera movement, which usually gets us to discard yet another photo. This is what we're talking about today. If you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment, let me know you're here. Like I say, if you're watching the recorded version, there's plenty you can drop down, find the timestamps if there's bits you would rather leap towards. You can also leave comments. At all, whether you're watching live or recorded, you can also click the like button. Likes are always good. They help the algorithms. When we're going live, it sometimes shows it to a few more people. So yeah, the like, and if you're new here as well, the subscribe option, or at least the notify me of the next one, is always a good option too. I can see we've got comments in already, so let's say a few hello to the regulars. Marcy says, good morning everyone. Robert joins us, says, howdy all from a cloudy and somewhat foggy Los Angeles, California. You're a long way home, Robert, from home. That's usually Texas. Flying home around the podcast start, so we will catch up later. Took some really good photos at the Rush concert with my friend. Rush, wow, okay, look forward to seeing those, Robert. April says, good morning, greetings from a sunny and hot Long Island, New York. Gunilla joins us from Ireland, where it's been raining since last evening until now. John says, good day everyone, from a normal Midwest hot weather here in Ohio. Janet says, hi from a damp, somewhat cool Mississauga in Canada. 18 degrees C now, down from feeling like 30 plus through most of the week. Marcy says, it's beautifully sunny here in Winnipeg. Some deer were feeding in my yard this morning. You got to get your camera out for that one. Rona says, hello from a mosquito-infested London. Mosquito-infested? That's less common. Do you have a big pond where you are? Now, we used to the mosquitoes and midges and what have you up here in Scotland. Anyway, Susan joins us, says, hi from a sunny Kirkcudbright. Summer's back. Wow, well, it's not here in Castle Douglas, which is only 9 miles down the road. Cloudy and overcast here, where it's certainly sunny. Summer doesn't feel like it's back here. Never ceases to amaze me, that difference. What else have we got? Oh, Marilyn says, hello everyone, is from Colorado. Glad to be able to join live today. Excellent. Right, okay, so we have people in. We have a topic. So, a little reminder then. So let's, I need to do a little kind of desktop tidy up, and we can then start thinking, okay, well, got that, close that, and move that, and I'll pull that one up for ready. So, what are we talking about then? Oh no, Stacey's joined us and says, good morning, warm, sunny morning, no humidity, still cleaning up after the wedding party on the 30th of May. Oh, congrats, that's right, I forgot about that, Stacey. Congratulations. Hope you had a wonderful time. But if you're still cleaning up, 2 weeks later, that must have been one hell of a party. And there's lots of other comments of people saying hello to each other as well. So, intentional camera movement, as opposed to unintentional camera movement. This is so basically this topic was suggested by Janet after accumulating the most smug points for May, and she wanted to know more about intentional camera movement. And this is something we've seen her experiment with before. There's been a couple of podcasts in the past where I've talked about movement in photography, and some of the images that Janet has sent in for critique and feedback occasionally have been about using this notion of intentional camera movement. So the big thing about cameras is, for the most part, we are doing our best to try and keep them as steady as possible. So we adjust the shutter speed. We have a minimum level of shutter speed so that our hand wobble doesn't cause it to blur. Or if we have to go below that, maybe we stick it on a tripod or we rest it on a wall or something else. So what we're trying to do is keep the camera steady so that the bit we're interested in ends up being nice and sharp. So if you deliberately move the camera, then the image becomes blurred. And that's something that most of us spend kind of a lifetime in photography trying to avoid. So the idea of doing it intentionally just kind of feels a bit odd, a bit weird, something to try and get our head into a little bit. So that's what this episode 293, is all about. And at the end of this, I'm going to be setting a challenge. So hopefully I instill you with enough knowledge and ideas that you might want to have a go at entering the challenge for 2 weeks' time. So what do we mean? So the thing is about moving the camera. We can move the camera in a number of different ways. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is take you through, if you like, an introduction, a basic idea of what intentional camera movement is. So if we take something like this. Now, by its very nature, because what we're talking about is blur, and we're leaning into the blur rather than trying to run away and avoid it, then very often what we're talking about is slower shutter speeds. Now, because we want to have a slower shutter speed, before we have to start messing about with ND filters or anything like that, a good place to start tends to be the blue hour or even nighttime, when we would naturally be having a slower shutter speed to begin with. So if we take something like this is just, looking out across, I think this was, can't remember now, Fife possibly, some place. It was certainly we were on holiday somewhere in Scotland, and so we've got now it's either headland or it's cloud. I think that's headland, across a bit of a part of the sea. And now, what happens if we move sideways? Now we get this. So with this, what I did, now I can tell you exactly what the settings were on the camera. If I do this now, if I go to here, if I go now, let's just say when I was taking this photo, my settings were, I was at 100th of a second, ISO 250, and I was at an f-stop of 3.2. Okay, so an f-stop of 3.2. So we can say, I'm trying to get as much light in as I can, but because it's a kind of big distance scene, the depth of field, it didn't matter that I had a kind of a narrow depth of field. But I'm on 100th of a second. Now, when we move to this photo, what I've done is I've dropped it down to half a second. But half a second at this level, it's going to let way too much light in. So actually, I've gone to an f20. Okay, so an f20 to kind of even it up, and it's at an ISO 100. So with that then, for half a second, I've gone like that. So you go click. Okay, and what that's done is it's smeared the picture, and we get these kind of rather lovely soft lines kind of moving across, especially on the horizon there. Okay. So that kind of gives you a sort of starting point. Now that's a that kind of left to right is quite a good one if you've got horizon, if you've got kind of dominant horizontal lines. Another example then, taken around the same time, and I think it was Pittenweem, possibly, again, over on the Fife Coast. If Nadia was here, Nadia would know where this is. And this one, for example, then was, again, we've got the sun setting, and we're at, this is an f4, 125th of a second, ISO 125. And basically, I'm just noticing the glorious colours in the clouds, and trying to get a little bit of silhouetted, church spire, a little bit of a windmill, chimney tops, that kind of stuff. Now, again, not necessarily a great photo, but this is about what happens then if I move sideways. So with this then, I then drop the shutter speed down to half a second again, and this time I'm on an f32. And half a second of going like this moves it from that to that. So this is the point now whereby, yes, it's a blurred photo, but it's not a blurred photo like that first Ayres photo. It's not an accidentally blurred photo. It's a purposefully blurred photo. And are we starting to move into the direction of potentially something a little bit interesting? And this is really what it's about. Now, sorry, okay, a few people, sort of quick comments then, a few people sort of saying, I say essentially, congratulations to Stacey, what have you. Now, Roland says, re-ND filters on phones, blue tack some sunglasses to the phone. Okay, now, yes, trying to use your phone, I'm going to come along to a bit later in the podcast. So, yes, as Roland's mentioned it now, I just will say that these things are particularly difficult to get a good intentional camera movement with, and I will tell you why, and maybe we'll talk about whether there are ways around it, or whether it's some phones even have a sort of a built-in potential for it, but we'll talk about that later. Meg's joined us as well. It says hello everyone. So we've talked about that notion you can pan sideways. Another thing you can do though is you can pan up the way, a little bit like we tried with the as I was just showing you with the irises at the beginning. So if we flick over to here, what you see then is some birch trees. And the thing here, and what I've done here is I've gone click as it's moved up. And in this case, I've got it at a 15th of a second. Okay, so it's not like a full half a second or, quarter of a second or 2 seconds or anything like that, just 15th of a second. But 15th of a second is enough that if you kind of flick your wrists as you go click, you'll start to get some kind of shapes. And what's interesting about this then is, and it works because the birch trees are by and large pretty vertical. Okay, and so what we're trying to do is move the camera sympathetically with the dominant lines in the picture. So if the dominant lines are horizontal, like when you're taking in a landscape and layers of clouds, town, sea, what have you, then you go side to side. If the dominant lines are vertical, as in this case, then if we move sideways, it's just going to smear and blur much more. Whereas we move the camera upwards. And in this case, with these particular birch trees, we've got sunlight coming through and hitting some of them. And so some of the lines are really kind of showing a lot more. And there is this point here, which is worth remembering, and I'll probably mention it again, which is if you're doing this, brighter lines, especially when you're on a slower shutter speed, the light ones will tend to show up more when they smear. Susan says, I think the birch trees work because you haven't gone too far up to include the sky. I found that to be a problem. This is a good point, that what you need to do is you've kind of got to find your range. And that's an experiment. So, sometimes you might want to just point to the ground. It's almost like before you take it, if you're not sure, point the camera down a bit and go, okay, that's as low as I want to go. That's as high as I want to go. And just do a quick kind of tilt your hands a couple of times, almost just to induce a quick bit of muscle memory, and then go click or down the way, whichever way you want to do it. If you don't want to click up and go and hit the sky accidentally, start up and then go click and flick down. Okay, another one, same set of birch trees, but in the winter. I was out in the a month later. I was out at the same place. This is in Dalbeattie Woods, and so same set of birch trees, pretty much. And now what we've got is we've got snow on the ground and snow on the branches. And I've gone click and moved, and these settings are 1/8 of a second now, f7.1. Okay, and ISO 100. And interestingly, what I'm noticing here is some of these little branches across here have really made a bit of an impact. There's some really nice streaking going up, but we can see some of the branches going across. And I think what I've done here, and again I'm going to come back to this in a bit, is that notion of it's not a complete smooth ride. There's a click, there's a momentary pause, and then there's a movement. And that momentary pause allows certain lines, in this case some of these little ones that are going horizontal, to register slightly longer in that fraction of a second than the other bits. So it starts to create something, and then the smear happens with it, if that makes sense. Roland says, yep, it's all about constraint. April says that is cool with the snow. Susan says, love the snowy one. The horizontal branches are lovely. Okay, so we've got this sort of sense of that if we are going, so let's talk briefly then about what you are thinking about with the camera settings. With the camera settings, we are trying to create a blur. So the obvious starting point then is to slow the shutter speed enough. Now, we know from by accident, you can get blur even at a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second. Sometimes you want to be, if you've got a big zoom lens, you need to be maybe up to 250th of a second if you just don't want to have blur just by handshake. But if we're trying to get intentional blur, then very often you want to start dropping it down to below something like 1/20th of a second, depending on how fast you're going to move it, and you can move it, or whether you want to be more considered and gently move it. And it also then depends on the amount of light that there is as well. If it's a really bright sunny day and you don't have an ND filter, then you are maybe the lowest you're going to be able to get is something like a 20th of a second. And at that point, what you also want to do is you want to have your lowest ISO, so an ISO of 100. Okay, make sure you've got an ISO of 100, set that, and then make sure, and then basically take your f-stop to as big as the lens will go. Now, one of my earlier lenses there actually had an f-stop, went up to f32. My current lens, I think, will go up to an f-stop of f22. Okay, so you max out your f-stop, you max out or you minimize your ISO, and then you're playing with whatever shutter speed you've got left. This is, of course, why in lower light situations like the blue hour or nighttime, it tends to give you more options. But if you're in the daytime, if you've got something like an ND filter, which is the equivalent of, like, as Roland says, like sticking a pair of sunglasses over the front of your lens, letting less light in, that can sometimes give you options as well. So let's take a little run through. Now, one of the things I will say about this topic is it's a really interesting topic. It's not something I've done a huge amount of. I've played with it a little bit here and there. So when Janet said, okay, can we do a podcast specifically dedicated to this, I had to run out and do quite a lot of experimentation. So I don't have a big back catalogue of wonderfully beautiful photos to show you, but that's not what this is about. This is about an introduction to give you ideas to go out and play yourself with. So a couple of days ago, a little bit of evening sunshine in the garden. So I went out with camera and thought, okay, let's play with it a little bit. And I noticed there was backlight coming just across the back of the garden, over the wall, and it was hitting some grasses. The grass is growing up, but we're now sort of getting to the point where there's little kind of fluffy heads on the top of them. A little patch of garden where we started off with no mow May. For anybody who's kind of follows any of this is slightly kind of ecological idea that you leave part of your garden which you don't mow in order to allow wildflowers or grasses or whatever to grow, and insects, pollinators, and then the birds feed on these, and it just sort of helps the whole local ecosystem. So with that in mind, I created this. So what we have here is, in this photo, we are at, what have I got? Okay, now by the look of this, 2.5 seconds at an ISO 10,000 and an f/18. Okay, I've got an ND filter. I went out into the garden and I put an ND filter on the end to try and use it. But the point is what we've got is we've got these grasses, and I've moved this up, 2.5 second blur. I've gone click and I've just moved it up, and you can see the streaks. And now this, to come back to this point that I was saying, is that the lighter bits tend to really stand out. So we're really noticing these streaks much more than we're noticing these streaks down here. Okay, so the darker streaks aren't registering as much. And basically, because we're on a slow shutter speed, we're more likely to get, you know, blown highlights as such, but then we're kind of leaning into that as well. So again, if you look up here, you can kind of start to get a sense of what that kind of fluffy bit at the tops of the grasses, and then those are streaking as I'm kind of moving the camera up. Oh, Sandra, oh, Sandy. Yes, Sandy's joining us from a sunny Alberta. Welcome, Sandy. Okay, so we can do that. This one is at a slight angle, okay, because with this one, actually, it was already at, I think if I look in the background here, it's maybe moving. I might have just tilted the camera to try and keep a straight line with it. With this one, I realised that the grasses were moving slightly to the right. So I turned. Now, again, what I'm doing is I'm holding down, I'm going click, but because I've got this on about 2.5 seconds, I'm holding it for a fraction of a second, and then I'm moving it, and I'm moving it fairly slowly. So we are getting some of the detail of the grasses, and then we're getting this smear running off them. Oh, VG's joined us and says, good evening, everyone, from a drizzling Chennai. Took a walk, just got back. Welcome, VG. Glad you could make it. Now, what also happens when you're playing around with a slow shutter speed? Now, in this case, there was a bit of a breeze blowing as well. So as I kind of moved the camera, the grasses started to waver as a little bit of breeze came across. And you can get all these kind of smoky patterns. Or to go back to our pareidolia challenge, I'm sure probably a few of you might have started to notice potentially a face here with an eye and a nose and a mouth and a big brow and hair straggling up, something like Marge Simpson. So these wobbles here within it are caused by a breeze happening at the same time as I'm moving. So I'm trying to keep the camera fairly steady as I'm moving, but the breeze is coming into it as well. So if we take these grasses, this is me moving upwards. So I thought, well, what happens if I move sideways with these? And here now we get, again, the breeze is causing a slight wobble. So I'm now kind of moving the camera like this, and we're getting the smears, but because of the slight wobble of the actual grasses themselves, we're not getting a straight line, we're getting these wavy lines that are happening across it. So that kind of feels a bit interesting too. So far we've talked about the idea of kind of horizontal, vertical. We can maybe go with a diagonal if the dominant lines are diagonal. But here we're playing with this idea of grasses spotted about, and then as we move, we're creating streaks behind them. Oh, Marcy says she saw that face. This one here, I'm now doing circular movements. Okay, so click, move the camera around, see what happens with this. Okay, so hopefully you're starting to get this sense of creating interesting abstract patterns, right? It's no longer about, oh, there are some grasses, I have to capture the grasses and I have to get them in great detail. It's what patterns can I create? And the patterns are going to feel, I mean, there's a real random abstract quality to this. But it's done, and so it requires a lot of experimentation. To be honest, the hit rate of getting something interesting tends to be quite low. But you keep playing, and keep playing. And sooner or later, something grabs you and you go, ooh, and that's what we're after. In this one here, I'm now really I'm trying to speed up my, the amount that I'm swirling the camera. Okay. And we're getting even more swirly patterns. Now, I'm not saying, again, this isn't exactly award-winning photography, but the point of what I'm trying to get here is that we're moving into the realm of interesting patterns to start exploring the idea of going beyond just taking a photograph and getting a direct representation of what's in front of you. We are really using the camera as a tool for art, to explore, to create, to recognize when we have something interesting. Here's another one. This one, actually, I think there's some little pink flowers somewhere as well. And again, I'm kind of turning twisting it quite fast. And in fact, actually, this one, I think, was under a different... Yeah, I'm only on 1/5 of a second here, at an ISO 100, at an f/22. And at that point, I'm just trying to... So 1/5 of a second, I'm trying to kind of move the camera around in a circle. But at 1/5 of a second, I'm getting from here to here. It's not doing a complete circle because it's not fast enough. If I had that on 1/2 a second, I'd get more of a circle with it. But we're getting these lovely kind of wispy kind of swirls going on. Now, I will say, this is helped a little bit by what I've got here is I've got backlight. Okay, I've got the sun coming over the garden wall, hitting the grasses or the flower or whatever. And the wall itself that the sun is coming over is created a kind of darker background, and that's allowing the light and the colours to really spring out against the background. So you do have to have a think about what the background is. Susan says, do you have a filter on all of these images? I don't on this one, Susan. On where are we? On these ones, I did. I had an ND filter sitting on there. But actually, I'm starting to realise that my ND filter is a 10-stop ND filter, and that's actually too much. So I took the filter off. This was one of those, the first ones that I took when I took the filter off. So what this is all... Roland's saying, loving these. No idea you could get such interesting images. Great. Oh, that fills my heart with joy, Roland. Excellent. This is what I want you to, this is the point of this podcast is to open your eye up to look where we can go. Look at the playground. This is really what it is. This is a new playground to go into. We don't know what's there. We don't know how it's going to turn out. We don't know what it's going to look like until we've gone click and we look in the back of the camera. It's practically impossible. It's not something you can pre-visualize with any real degree of certainty. Marcy says, does lens manipulation count as ICM? A friend said it does not because I'm not moving the camera itself. It's on a tripod, only the lens. Yes, it does. And I'm going to come on to that. I will come on to that in the second part of this podcast. Yes, lens manipulation does count as intentional camera movement because you are taking part of the camera and you are moving it. So, okay, but this is the starting point. Every photo... Yes, yeah, Roland says zooming. Yes, that's exactly what Marcy's talking about, is zooming in. And I will talk about that in a minute. But first of all, I just want to point out, so all the photos I've shown you so far, this, well, not these two. These two were, I've gone in and edited afterwards. But these earlier ones here are all just straight out of the camera, just to give you a sense of what's going on. Now, here's another one I did, which has got foxgloves. Now, this was actually practically the first photo I did out in the garden. Now the colour's funny because I'd actually got the white balance set for when I was doing an indoor shoot the day earlier in the week, and I hadn't got round to. I'd forgotten about it, so this looks a little bit odd. But what I want to do here is show you how you can take something like this and then just start playing with the edit, because the photo is, especially at this point, when we're talking abstract, it's not about trying to create a direct representation of anything. Like I say, we are into the realms of art. We are into the realms of experimentation. The camera, the lens, the settings, the light, the movement are all part of our tools. Okay, so let me open this with Photoshop, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So we take something like this. Now I'll just duplicate that layer, and then what I will do is I will take it into Camera Raw just to show you kind of what's going on. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what, we won't even bother with Camera Raw. I will use some of the little tools down here just for those of you who don't know. Now, what we have, first of all, say I go to, I've got colour and vibrance. Now, because of the colour thing I had here, it was shifted very far into the blues. So if I take this and I drag this into the yellows a little bit, and then maybe drag in the, because this is foxgloves, okay? This is foxgloves, and that colour was completely wrong. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to move this about until we get more into the colour of foxgloves that we kind of like, which is maybe something a little bit more like this. It's still looking a little bit dull. Maybe I boost the vibrance a little bit, just something like that. This is now getting interesting. Now what I can also do is I can go to contrast, okay? So let's take the contrast and then play with that a little bit. And then maybe what I could do is say clarity and dehaze. Now dehaze also adds a kind of bit of contrast, but if I get the clarity, that kind of really brings out texture into it. Let's go back to the colour, and I'll tell you what you can also do is there's a little stopper here, a little pipette, and we can choose a particular point, and what it does is it balances the white according to that point. So if we go into the yellow, it will make everything very blue. If we go into the purple, it makes everything very green. So we can find a point in here. It's another way of doing it. Until we get to a kind of a colour version we like. Okay, so I'm going to do something like that, but maybe I'm going to pull that slightly more back into the purple or something like that, and maybe boost that a little bit, something like that. And here I think we're kind of getting into something which is really quite beautiful. Maybe I actually want to boost the saturation a little bit more. And then maybe what I will do is, rather than just having that fully smack bang in the middle, I maybe don't want so much of the sun coming in, and maybe I just kind of move that around, something like that. And then let's just do a final thing. We'll go to the levels here. No, I think, okay, I'm actually going to crunch that in a little bit, something like that. So what we're seeing here then is that we've gone from this to this. And as you've seen, there's 100 different ways that I could edit this as well, until I find something which makes me go, ooh. Okay, I could play down that yellow, I could crop it slightly different, I could remove that brighter patch up there. But like I say, this is the sunlight just coming over the top of the wall. Now with this particular shot, I've gone click and I've just kind of wobbled the camera a bit. I've not tried doing a big streak. I've not tried doing a long side to side. You could also do a judder or a jitter or something like that. And so for a bunch of foxglove flowers that have all kind of gone together, you just use your half a second or whatever to do some kind of shake. So this is what we're into, is it's not just taking the photo, it's then how you decide you're going to edit it as well. What are the colours? What are the contrasts? Where do you want to actually sort of really deepen the texture? Or where do you want to soften the texture? Where do you want to boost the vibrance? Or where do you want to dull it down? All these things are here at the same time. I mean, in exactly the same way, if I wanted, I could select all this, put it onto a separate layer here. And I will just very quickly go into Camera Raw filter just to show you. I could go black and white. Within that black and white, I could really decide to boost the texture. I could really then decide to boost the clarity. Sorry, when I said texture, I meant contrast. I could add a bit of a vignette to kind of pull in those bright patches on the corners. Okay. And so now, you know, now we're into very, very abstract. We've gone black and white abstract. Now, whether you like this or not is going to come down to a personal taste. For some people, they're going to look at this and it's going to be, oh, wow, look at it. For some people, it will be the pareidolia. You know, can I see faces in this? For some people, it will just be, look at the lines, look at the texture, look at the feel. And for some people, it'll be, bleh. Give me something I can recognize. Okay. So that's just to show you, you know, doing a black and white version of that you can take this in any direction you want. So there's a lot of fun to be had here. Now, for a lot of us, when we're taking photos, what we're trying to do is take a photo of something that's fairly obvious, or we know what it is we're photographing. We're taking a photo of this poppy, we're taking a photo of this caravan, we're taking a photo of this view of the forest or the waterfall or the beach, and what we're trying to do is get the best representation of it that we can, or even the idea of a mood and a story of what we're feeling at it at the time. And that's most, but when we get into the notion of abstract, the abstract really is down to your personal interpretation. There's no right or wrong beyond, do you like it? Now, it's very, very difficult to create abstract which you can guarantee somebody else is going to like, because abstract really does, the way you view abstract comes from within your own brain and the way you interpret colour, light, line, form. There will be, whatever you do, there will be some people who will go, wow, and there will be some people who will pull a face and just not want anything to do with it. It doesn't matter. This is where it really becomes important, that it's about your taste. And I think for a lot of us, sometimes, a lot of the time we're doing photography, we're too kind of busy going, will somebody else like this? Rather than, how can I play with this until it just makes me tingle? Okay? So, this is why I kind of get quite excited about this notion. John says, the images look like they're from outer space or the Aurora Borealis. That's it. You start kind of, you don't have the same reference points for it. So your brain starts to kind of tag on to other things. And that's why I think it's fascinating. So we've got that notion then that, Lisa's joined us. Hello all. So sorry, I'll have to watch the recording. I'm with my husband who's in the hospital. Okay, but that husband in hospital takes priority over podcasts. We hope that everything's okay, all under control. Wishing you all the best there, Lisa. And catch up. Let us know if there's anything you find interesting or you're left questioning at the end of it. Right, okay, so what was I saying there? Yeah, now one of the problems we do have is the fact that, so I'm kind of running ahead of myself here. No, next thing I want to move on to here is the notion of, there's another form of intentional camera movement where it's not absolutely abstract, but it's where what we are trying to do is keep part of the image in focus as we're moving the camera. And that is sometimes known as the action pan or panning, where what we're doing is we're following a moving object. And it's extraordinarily difficult to do. But now, I don't actually have any real photos of my own to show here. So I'm going to pounce on Janet. And I'm hoping that she'll be okay with me using a couple of the photos that she sent in before now for feedback and critique, or for where she's entered into one of the challenges. And this one here was a skater, an ice skater. And the point of this is that what's happening is the skater is moving. Now, if you are there with your camera going click, and you're wanting to not have a completely blurred skater, normally what you would do is you would have a higher shutter speed. You might be on 200 or 300th of a second, something like that. But at that point, you would capture not just the skater, but the whole background static. And it's very difficult to get that real sense of movement if everything looks static. The skater could just be there in a pose, not actually moving. But if you can somehow, as the skater's moving, go click, maybe, I don't know, do I have I can't remember if I actually have any settings on that. Oh, I do, yes. So, Janet has done an F32, so going to this notion, I mean, it's bright. This skater is on ice, and so therefore, there's going to be a lot of light about. So in order to try and lessen the light, she's gone to f32. She's got a 100 ISO, I think. Oh no, not even that. ISO 32. Wow, I didn't even know you could get an ISO. Must be something to do with your camera. Can't do it on the Canon, at least not without making some adjustments I've never made. And an eighth of a second. So an eighth of a second is as slow as she can get. But an eighth of a second, she's gone click. So she's following in. Now, generally speaking, this is one of those where what you don't do is click and move. You follow the skater, and as the skater's moving, you go click. So you're already moving the camera. Okay, so you lock onto the camera, you move, you're following it, you go click and stick with it that way. And that's the most likely chance you have of being able to keep it steady. Another one here we've got is of cyclists. So cyclists coming around, she's doing the same kind of idea on this. And then there was another one from a different one here where she's got a cycle. Now, and with this one, not only is she panning, but the fact is because they're coming round the corner, she is manipulating the zoom as well. So she's trying to, so we're getting this kind of zoom effect thing going on, and she's moving it. Okay. Extraordinarily difficult to do. And consequently, whilst some are sort of, nothing's in complete focus, but there are bits which are in slightly more focus than other bits. And there's enough there to be able to identify what's going on. So this is where what's Janet's been doing, whether it's skaters or it's cyclists, there's something moving. And what you do is you track it and you go click. Now, one of the major problems you have with any form of tracking with most cameras, certainly with my cameras, unless Janet's found another way of manipulating hers, is that the problem is when you go click, if you're on an SLR especially, or DSLR, then while it's going click, you can't see in the back of the screen. You can't see through the viewfinder. The viewfinder goes black. Right? Now, when you're going click and it's 160th of a second, that doesn't matter. But if you're going click and it's half a second, it matters because you're trying to track. And at the very point you're trying to track, suddenly your screen goes blank and you can't keep an eye on what's going on. So this doesn't help. You're trying to track it and you go click and you're blind for the point that you're actually moving the camera. And that really ramps up the level of difficulty of trying to keep what's going on, trying to keep it going. So yeah, anyway, thank you, Janet, for these ones, because like I say, I don't actually have anything sitting in my, and there wasn't anything of interest for me to be able to grab in the last, since we came up with the idea of talking about this. A couple of comments. What have we got? Marcy says that's a great photo. Marilyn says bicyclists are amazing. Roland says love that. Susan says great shot, Janet. Well done. Roland says combine with a flash. Now, flash and movement, yes, you can do. And there is a whole different area of photography where you are doing that. Generally speaking, yeah, I'm just trying to think. There's a Japanese photographer I know called Tatsuo. Suddenly can't remember his name. Anyway, Tatsuo, I know his one. He does a lot of black and white street photography, and he's doing a lot of low light photography, and he uses a flash. So he's going click, but because it's low light, you're also getting ghostly movement as well with it. You're now into a whole new level of complication, and it's not something I'm particularly going to cover on this podcast. But it is something you can experiment with as well. Yes. April says, I love the bike shot. Now, Janet says, I do worry about getting the flash in the cyclist's eye and blinding them. Well, I think that's a good point, and that's very considerate. Yeah, it's not a good idea to use the flash if you're shooting sports. In fact, there are certain sports venues and stuff like that where they specifically ban flash photography precisely for that. But that notion, though, of capturing movement with a flash, it might not necessarily be cyclists or sports people. It could be other things you could be tracking as well. There's potential there. Okay. So where are we at? One other thing. Yeah, one other thing. I will just. No, I'll get to that afterwards, I think. So, yeah, okay. Yes, the next one then is the zoom. To go back to then. So we're starting to get it with this one, with Janice. And to go back to, can't remember now, was it Marcy's point or somebody said the point of, can you manipulate the lens? Does that count? Taking a quick look, can't remember. Okay, somebody will be able to scroll back and remember who said it. But basically, yes, you can. That idea of zoom manipulation is also very much a part of what's known as intentional camera movement. It doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be the whole camera. You can, but the zoom, the lens, is an integral part of the camera. So yeah, absolutely, if you are entering an intentional camera movement competition or contest, and even if you've got the camera on a tripod and you just move the lens, it will count. Okay, well, maybe read the small print. Maybe I can't say definitively for all intentional camera movement, but if they don't allow that, they ought to say that somewhere in the rules. So what, okay, let me show you then an example. So again, yesterday, out with the out in the garden, went back out, and we've just had a poppy. We've got this large poppy has just opened up in the garden, and quite surprisingly, suddenly noticed from the kitchen window looking out, there's this splash of red. And as I said before, sometimes red is like selective colour on its own. You don't have to black and white anything else. Red just goes, yay! And it does. There's got this garden all full of greens and yellows and all bits and pieces, and this little dot of red. So I went out and I tried then doing the zoom with the poppy, and we end up with this. Okay, so in this particular photo, what settings have I got? I'm not using an ND filter. I've got it on f22 100 ISO at 1/8 of a second. Okay, so 1/8 of a second is enough to allow me to just go click zoom. Now you can zoom in and you can zoom out. Okay, so you can zoom and go click as you're moving. You can, so you're already moving and go click, or you can go click and move at the same time. So you can play around with that. Marcy says, yes, it was me, with a question being prompted by a friend who has a stick preventing him from sitting comfortably. I think I know what you're saying there, Marcy, being polite. Okay, yes, it's a family show. We won't spell anything out in detail. So this notion then that you go click and you move and you're zooming in, how you're zooming out. And what happens is if you are focused on a particular point and you can keep that point in focus as you zoom in, you get this real kind of all the lines draw in or draw out from the center. And we've got this with this particular poppy, we've got the red leaves, the one, and this kind of dark, almost furry kind of bit in the middle. And it's really creating a very strong, vivid kind of idea. So I played around with the poppy a little bit. I wasn't getting too far with this. And then I noticed we had a peony. We've got this really dark red peony in the garden as well. So I did the same thing here. And this one is sitting in among a whole bunch of other flowers. So all these yellows and other red, there's bits of other peony and all sorts of other colours are kind of coming into it. Now, these are straight out of the camera again. And to give you a sense of what's going on. So what have I got? Again, I've got it at f22, which is as the highest f number I can get to on this particular lens. A 100 ISO, the sun had just gone behind the clouds at this point, which allowed me to get down to 1/4 of a second. So in 1/4 of a second, I'm going click, and I'm just kind of really, trying to be as fast as I can within that. Now, what I'm going to show you now is half a dozen different ones of the same thing, because each time you do it, it's different. Either you're zooming in or you're zooming out, or you've wobbled, you've gone slightly to the left or slightly to the right. And back to that problem of the fact is, at the point you go click, you're blind. Okay, the screen goes blank. And if you're doing this for even half a second or whatever, and you're zooming, suddenly you can't see the point to keep the zoom on. So you go slightly off point and it starts to wobble out a little bit more. You're zooming in, zooming out, getting all these trails. This one starting to slow down a little bit, and this one going in. So I'm, rather than trying to go full, like as full zoomed in or out as I can, I'm just sort of just doing a little bit of zoom in or out. And when I do that, a little bit more of it's starting to show. We're getting sort of some bits of detail. So that notion of a sort of click and move. Okay. So there's a holding it for a fraction of a second and then moving it. Now, it all depends how much time you've got. So back to this notion, longer shutter speed, the longer your shutter speed, the more chance you have to manipulate it. Again, another one here, zooming in, trying to keep it relatively smooth. Now, one of the things I would say is there's another interesting thing, one other thing I want to mention is when you're zooming in, I like it all doing the zoom thing, is to understand that actually things in the distance don't move as much as things in the foreground. It's the same thing if you're doing a sort of slight pan. I mean, if you think about when you're driving in the car, you look out the window and the bits just, the bit of hedgerow or whatever, or the walls just by the side of the car are whizzing past. The trees in the distance are going slower. The mountains in the far distance are going much slower again. Okay, so further away, your point, the point of your camera relative to where the thing is, means it doesn't move as much. The point I want to make with that is if we take a look at something like this. So here's a little bunch of flowers, which I think they were the ones that were giving me that sort of slight curve earlier. Like I say, we've got the backlight, we've got the sunlight coming through here. And where I've gone the zoom, you can see that on the flowers, we've got the zoom coming in here and it's creating that blur. But actually in the background, where we've got an old bit of wall, some leaning up bits of wood and what have you, not such an attractive bit of the garden, that's almost still in focus. Okay. The closer we get to the camera, the more it smears. So actually some of these bits here is smearing quite a lot. But in the background, it hasn't smeared as much. Okay, so just that kind of point that I really want to make is that sometimes you can take that bit into consideration as well, which is that if you've got something far off in the distance, and it's most noticeable if you're kind of doing a zoom in or out, then that itself might not change as much as the foreground. Marcy says, I like that very much. Right. Okay. So let's take a pause for a moment and just a little kind of to remind you that if you find, well, first of all, if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can support these podcasts. Now, the other thing is, and I will probably keep banging on about it now forever, which is the Substack newsletter. So for those of you, so I've now on to, I think the third one just went out last week. So kimairesphotography.substack.com. So basically, one or two of you may have noticed on Facebook, I put up a post yesterday where basically I put up a previous post and Facebook said, if you want to pay £2, we will show this to 6 of your followers. 6 of my followers, if I want to pay them £2. Now, my Kim Ayres Photography Facebook page has 2,900 followers. How much is it going to cost me if I want all of them to see it? Now, when you've got nearly 3,000 followers, that's more than just your friends being supportive. Okay, you maybe get 50 people signing up and following you because they they're not interested, but they they're being supportive, and that's nice. Maybe you get 100, throw in all your family, throw in everybody you know, you may be up to 300. You get up to 3,000. Each of these people has decided to follow that page because they have some kind of interest in my photography or the way I explain my photography or something about it. Facebook isn't showing it to hardly any of them. And it's got worse and worse. And anybody who's got any kind of business on social media knows that it's just all they try and do now is take. So I'm trying to reclaim some of that by going back to good old fashioned email. And here we have the Substack newsletter that I've set up. So it's not one of these that I'm bombarding people with, and it's not hidden behind a paywall. Okay, so it's sitting there, and roughly once a month, maybe 2 or 3 times more if there's a busy month going on. You're very rarely likely to get anything more than one in a week. So I'm not going to bombard you with it. But if you're interested in keeping track of, or you want to hear about whether events I'm doing, workshops that I'm doing, I do a little reminder of what's coming up in the month on the podcast, or in case you miss something, and usually some kind of interesting article about some shoot that I've done or something like that. Then sign up to it. And also, if you happen to know anybody else who you think might be interested, point them to it as well. Okay, so I'm hoping to really start building the following back via the newsletter, because I think I like that idea of that sort of straightforward connection, not having to go via the social media. Okay, rant over. The other bit we've got this bit of screen up, which is if you want to send in images for challenges, like the one I'm going to set here, or for feedback, like we've got next week, then kimayrspodcast@gmail.com is the place to send it. So lots of information here. If you're watching this back later, you can always pause it to scribble down any of the contact details. What have we got here? Susan says, always entertaining. Marcy says, Facebook is failing because they are starting to roll out these pay-to-use models, Instagram too. Whether they're failing or not, I don't know. They've got some of the smartest minds in the world dedicated to screwing the most amount of money out of us they possibly can. Some of us just get a bit too fed up with it. Stacey only uses Facebook to show photos and wish people a happy birthday. Yeah, I think there's a few of us like that. And Marcy says, I mentioned a few weeks ago about most of us moving away from Facebook. A lot of us are. The problem is that Facebook has allowed me to keep in contact with people on the other side of the world, old friends I went to school with, family members, in a way that wouldn't have been so easy if I didn't have a social media account. So I kind of keep hold of it, but I use it less and less. Roland says, fed up with Adobe too. Yeah, they're all at it. But so far, I haven't got fed up with Substack. So there we go. kimayrsphotography.substack.com. Sign up to that one. And then if anything happens here as well, or Lauren would say that I end up locked out of my own YouTube account for something, then, I can let everybody know via that as well. So something for keeping in contact with. Right. Okay. So also while I'm here then, just a quick update on the Smug points. So we know that Janet won the Smug points for last month because she's the one who came up with the idea of the intentional camera movement. So far this month, VG and Gunilla are both sitting on 30 Smug points, and that's because they both put in an image for feedback last week. They get 25 Smug points for submitting an image, and 5 Smug points for being here while we're live, typing away in the comments. So, and everybody else is just on 5 Smug points or whatever if they were leaving a comment live. So, where are we at then? Let's move on. And now, so far what I've talked about is the idea of the single exposure. So we've gone click and we've moved the camera. We've moved the camera left or right. We tried circular movements. We tried up and down. We tried zooming in and zooming out. Okay. But there's another way you can kind of play around with intentional camera movement as well, which is quite fun, which is if you have a multiple exposure option. Now, not all cameras do. Some have them well hidden away in the menu settings. But if I press my menu here, I don't know whether you can see here, but on my particular camera, I've got a thing here which says multiple exposure. And if I press on that, I can then got a couple of options here. I can do on count shooting. I can set the number of exposures. So what I did here was I went, while I was out in the garden, playing around with this, I thought, well, what happens then if I do a multiple exposure? And so I took it, what it does is I can go click, and I can go click 6 times, and then the camera will merge them all together. Okay, it will kind of give a sixth of the amount of exposure, if you like, to each image as it overlays them. And then what happens is it's not necessarily so much about moving the camera for each individual shot, but you move the camera between shots. And then what happens is all these images start to become overlaid. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if we go back to that poppy that I was talking about, that I showed you earlier. So what I did here was a kind of a judder. I'm going click, I'm holding it down to go 6 clicks. Click, 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 right? And just sort of moving it slightly. And what we find is we've got this kind of intentional movement blur style, except the fact rather than it smearing, we can see very distinct ghost outlines, okay, where it's running across, where each one is merging slightly into the other one. And together they create this sort of layered pattern. And if you can move it a little bit, or you can move it more. So here I'm making a slightly larger movement. And so that the center part of it isn't quite as obvious, and it becomes even more kind of pushed out to the edges. Here I'm coming down to the side a little bit, and it's sort of moving about. And this kind of layering is still intentional camera movement, because I am intentionally not keeping the camera. Now, you can do this. You can use this multiple exposure setting with the camera on a tripod, and say you've got a street scene or something, and you can click, and what it will do, it will layer up all these sort of ghosts of people walking past, or vehicles moving, or whatever else is happening. Okay, but I'm deliberately doing this handheld. And if you're doing it handheld, even if you tried, it would be virtually impossible to make sure that everything stayed in exactly the same place. So you hold the camera and you go click, and your hand's going to wobble anyway. So the point is that you actually make a feature of it. Just move it. You could go click, 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 click sideways, or you can go click, 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 click in a circle, or up or down, or just judder the camera a bit. So Susan says similar effect to pepventosa. Pepventosa. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to admit I don't get the reference. This might be showing my ignorance, and I'm going to have to go and Google it afterwards. I don't know what pepventosa is. Okay, now I've probably horrified a few people with my level of ignorance. Roland says the rabbit hole is deep with this topic. Absolutely it is. And I'm taking you as deep as, well, at least to get started with. Marcy says, I like zoom in and out in one shot. It's not easy, but I got lucky a few times. We'll keep trying because I know there is something there. Yes. Well, that's it. You keep trying, right? Now, to show you again, another example here of what happens when you so here's one of those little flowers, which is the same as that one that I showed you where you could see the background going on, and you can see that. So we've got the flower, we've got a couple of other stems kicking about, and you can see that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of this stem, almost looking like guitar strings. So there's 6 of, go and click. But if that's just doing it with a very small amount of movement, if I do the movement wider, we can now see that it's stretching much further. So you can contain it, or you can stretch it out. When you stretch it out, you've got these kind of overlaying bits. And if you see, it's quite different from the notion of the smooth smear that you get with a single shot movement. So it's not to say that one is better than another. What we're doing here is introducing you to other options to play with. Susan says you'll have to look it up. It's quite interesting. Okay, will do. Here's another one. I think is it a chive or something? So you get a little stem coming up with all these little spiky bits, and again, you kind of wiggle it about a bit, and you get these kind of fancy, interesting little effects going on. And probably one of my favorites from doing this out in the garden was this one as well, where and the thing is about this, what I would say is the advantage, where you really notice the advantage of being able to do the multiple exposure over the single exposure, is with the single exposure, primarily you are restricted, because you're trying to restrict the light so much so that you can have the slow shutter speed. It means that you end up having an f20, an f30, and whatever it is, so that you're not getting that beautiful bokeh shallow depth of field which you get with some, whereas this is taken like with an f3.2. I can just do ordinary exposures, or shallow depth exposures, and then I can go click, 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 and I get that lovely soft effect, but I've still got this multiple image overlay with it. Okay, so you're using a different set of camera settings when you're doing multiple overlay and multiple images in the single shot rather than a single image in the shot. What we've got, Susan says the chive is gorgeous, my favourite of the day. Roland says, wow, Pop Ventosa, love those. Okay, definitely going to have to go and look it up. Stacey says, thank you for clarifying ICM. My photography club didn't really explain it very well, although I did shoot a few years ago. Good, I'm glad this is working. Okay, so now what I want to do is, one other thing that I was going to say with intentional camera movement is this is so far being me hand holding the camera. You can also get intentional camera movement by not physically holding the camera, but by putting the camera on a platform or device or some place which itself is moving. Okay, now one or two of you may have seen these shots before, but one of the things I did once was when I was driving home one evening, I put my camera on the dashboard and I sat it on a bean bag so that it would sort of be relatively steady, and I did long exposure. So and in this case, let me just see so I had it on f22 and a 6-second exposure, and what I did was this. Okay, so this then is, I'm driving, the car is moving, the car is also juddering over potholes or just bumps in the road. There's other cars, so we're getting smears, we're getting sort of strange bits of movement happening. As the road is turning, we can see that we've got lines going both ways. So cars are turning off to the right here as I'm then turning off to the left. So across the course of 6 seconds, what's really coming out is, again, the bright lights of the headlights and the lights of the cars. Okay, and so I had it set for this 6-second exposure. I'm just driving along. I'm letting the camera get on with itself, because if you're doing this, you're supposed to be driving the road. You don't want to be hand holding a camera while driving. Absolutely not. But it's not too much of a problem. You're driving, you're concentrating, you just go click, something like that. It's no worse than kind of hitting your indicator. But you've got to have it in a place where you're not having to look at it. Again, absolute safety is certain here. Or what you do is you do it when somebody else is driving. You let them drive, and then you can operate the camera as it's sitting on the dashboard. Stacey says that it's fabulous. Marilyn says great shot and great idea. Gunilla says, how about focus, manual or auto? Well, in the case of this one, I've put it on manual focus. I've put it at a kind of probably an infinity thing. It's already an f22 or something like that, so it's going to be kind of in focus from front to back as well. You set it on a kind of an infinity manual because you're not worrying about anything too close up, and then you just leave it, because if it sort of refocuses each time, it might end up refocusing on a dead splattered fly on the front of the windscreen, so that doesn't really matter. If you're doing, to go back to that notion of where we were zooming in and out, focus on the point that you are zooming in or out of. If you're panning left or right on a point on the horizon, you focus the horizon. If you're panning up and down on the trees, you focus on that point of the trees. But you create that focus, and I would say, sort of get the focal point, and then if you're putting it on manually focus it, or if you're doing the equivalent of back button focusing, then you focus it with your back button. Then when you take it off, you can click and you know it will already be in focus where you needed it. Hope that makes sense. Another option with this one was here a little bit further. I'm coming over the street down to the high street in Castle Douglas, and we can now start to see a few buildings. We've got trees coming down on the left, we've got houses coming down on the right, and again bumping over manhole covers and bits and pieces, and lots of streaky lights. Now again, this is a prime example of, some people think it's really cool, some people think it's awful. It doesn't really matter. The point is the experimentation. So so at this point, the camera is sitting on a vehicle which is moving. So it is still camera movement, but it's not handheld camera movement. Now, interestingly, when you think about there's an awful lot of photography where you have image stabilizers. Your gimbal, as such, is designed such that you can move and it will sort of keep the image steady. And a lot of phones have that bit doing that as well. Roland says you can do a kind of dolly zoom in a moving car. Well, that's true as well. Lots of playing around with that. Marcy says, I used to shoot those car streaks back in the day of film. Much harder to do with film because you really don't know what's going to work until until you get it. Now, the final bit I want to talk about, and then I'm going to tell you all about what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. But what I want to talk about now is the notion of the phone, because so far we've talked about intentional camera movement, and with intentional camera movement we've looked at the idea of the pan left and right, the pan up and down, the idea that we should be following the dominant lines usually. But sometimes when you're moving, if the thing you're photographing itself, like those grasses in the wind, are also moving, you can end up with interesting wavy streaks. But you don't have to go in a straight line. You can move around, you can judder, you can shift, you can swirl. There's lots of different ways you can think about moving the camera. Then there's the idea of the zoom in and the zoom out as well. So maybe the camera isn't moving particularly that much, but the lens is. And so that's creating smears and a sense of movement as well. And then we've talked about the idea of not just it all happening in a single shot, but the multiple overlay. So if you have a multiple overlay option on the camera, you can sometimes do that as well. And of course, I don't want to forget the notion of the action pan, which is where you are following a moving object, and you're trying to basically keep that moving object pretty much in focus so that the background smears out and it gives you this really strong, powerful sense of movement in a photo. So these are all the different kinds of things that, oh yeah, and finally that bit of actually having the camera on a platform itself, which is moving, like as in the case of the car. So these are all different kinds of forms of intentional camera movement. I have heard quite a lot of people say ICM as in-camera movement, but it is intentional camera movement is the proper idea behind it, or the proper phrase rather. So now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the notion of phones, because I've been trying with the phone and it is extraordinarily difficult to do, because the phone is designed to create a good photo for somebody who hasn't got a clue what they're doing with it. Okay, you, dear wonderful regular viewers, you've at least got half an idea, if not a really full, complete idea of how to use the camera. Right? If you weren't that interested in photography, you wouldn't be watching this. So you at least have more idea than most people. The cameras on phones are designed for people, the majority, who don't necessarily have anything like the level of understanding you do. So these are designed to do it all for you. So as long as you wave it roughly in the right direction, it tends to be in focus, exposed properly, and giving you something which is technically okay. It might not have the best composition. The person might have no understanding that the backlight would have been better than side light in these conditions. That's what you, as a photographer, as an artist, as a creative, these are the things you know. You go beyond what the iPhone can do. But for the average person, this does it all. Now, the problem with that is the way that it does it is mostly what these phones do is they take multiple images, they do a multiple exposure, they might take anything between 5 and 50 photos in that fraction of a second, and then merge them all together using sophisticated algorithms and what have you, so that the right bit is exposed. So it's doing multiple exposures and it's doing multiple positions and it's merging them together. one of the upshots of this, some we've talked about before, is they're terrible at trying to get silhouette photos, because it automatically lightens the foreground. So you see this brilliant silhouetted tree or church spire against these incredible sky, and you go click. And instead of having the silhouette, it's now showing the building or the tree in all its glory with all its detail, and that wasn't what you wanted. So that's one of the downsides about this. And the other downside is trying to get a movement, right? So I'm going to show you here. For example, I decided that just for the sake of it, I was out for my walk. I thought I'm going to try and get a smear photo, right? It doesn't really matter what it is. I was just out for a walk. I was in a park. There's some houses, and then there's a bit of sky, right? And I thought, well, it doesn't matter. I just want to see, can I get one of those smear photos? Obviously not as dramatic as this one, but to get this kind of idea out of this photo. And I couldn't. This is me going, yeah. I'm sort of doing this. The best I managed was this, which, as you can see, it's slightly blurry on the houses. And honestly, I mean, I am swinging it at this kind of speed to try and go click, click. And it's just not doing it, right? It's grabbing one of these and then giving me the still image. Really difficult to try and do. Another one was I thought, well, okay, I saw some little flowers in the grass, and I thought, where are we? Yeah. Now, this here, I mean, I am literally going, yeah. Trying to move this as fast as I can in order to create this. Now, it's given me this, but it didn't just give me this. It gave me two photos for the one. It said, this is my, and I had this on long exposure setting, right? But it also said, well, you can have this one if you want. And it's giving me, look how sharp that bit is, given the fact that I'm going as fast as I can, right? And this shows you what the camera is doing. It's not taking a long exposure photo to give me this. It's doing a multiple photo thing, multiple exposure. And then just because it sort of, I put it on long exposure, it's blending them together. But you can see from the lines here, it's not a smooth, remember that effect that we were having when I did the multiple exposure, was you got the repeat pattern rather than the smear. Okay. And we can see here that we've got these repeats rather than the smear. And so your phone isn't doing a traditional smear. It's just taking multiple photos at very, very high speed, so that your average person who isn't really thinking about it is going, oh, look, wonder what's going on over there. I'm walking here. Let's go click. I'll take a photo out the side of the window as we're driving. All these kind of things. It's just taking multiple photos and then feeding them together. So a single one of these looks like this. So even though I'm shaking the camera like mad. Another example was I tried the pan zoom. Now there is actually an option on my phone, which along with long exposure is action pan. Okay. So again, quick sec, trying to capture a car as it's driving past. And here we go. Oh, right. Yeah, great. Looks like a nice action shot. But this, again, is giving me the two options, right? If I want, I can just have the still photo. I mean, that looks like the guy's parked. Right? It just looks like a car parked on the other side of the road. And what it's done, again, is it's taken multiple photos. And because I've chosen the option action pan, it has strung them together to kind of give this illusion. Okay? So to understand then that your phone isn't operating the same way as your SLR, DSLR, mirrorless, or whatever. It's operating on a different kind of level. It's doing a multiple exposure. That's partly why I wanted to sort of show you the multiple exposure idea earlier, so you can recognize that that's what's happening with your phone. So, okay, let's move on then. I've been showing you all this stuff about intentional camera movement. Now hopefully I've inspired you, because in 2 weeks' time, we're having the Intentional Camera Movement Challenge. Yay! Episode 295 will be the ICM Photo Challenge. So this is your opportunity to go and try some of this stuff out. You've got 2 weeks, or just slightly under 2 weeks. What I want you to do is I want you to go and play. Try swinging to the left, try swinging up and down, to the right, go round in circles, zoom in, zoom out, sit and bounce around in a car, wave it all over the place. Put it into Photoshop, play with the sliders all over the place, and come up with something beautifully abstract, right? Or some kind of action pan if you can really do it and you feel you've nailed it, okay? This is your chance to really go and have fun. And then send me your images. So, send the images to kimayrespodcast@gmail.com, okay? If you really need to send them to my personal email address, you can, but honestly, that one's making it so much, makes life so much easier for me. Okay, so send in your image, try to get them to me by no later than Friday the 19th. No, sorry, hold on, it's the 14th today, it will be the 28th in 2 weeks, Friday the 26th. Okay, Friday the 26th of June, 2026. Send me your image, send it to this email address, and tell me a little bit about the photo, because actually if it's suitably abstract enough, I might not even know what it is. Tell me what it is, maybe tell me a little bit about what it is you did to create the effect you did, because the idea behind these challenges always, partly is to make sure you get the chance to go out and have a go, but also so that we learn, okay? We've got a community here. We've got everybody who's taking the time to turn up live and leave comments, but we also have people who don't get the chance to watch live but come and watch later. And at this point, we're looking to help. It's not just how I've gone about it, it's about how everybody else has gone about it. Each of you has an entirely different eye, an entirely different set of circumstances and lifestyles and experiences and brain wiring that have brought you to this point, which means that we will all take this challenge and come at it from a slightly different way, or sometimes a very different way. And that then, those different ways become inspirational to everybody else to also have a go and go, well, okay, this is what I thought I was doing. Oh my God, look what April's done. Look what Janet's done. Look what Susan's done. Well, it doesn't matter. It's like, it just go, wow, right, okay, I can try that at home. Okay, or I can try that next time I'm out for a walk, or I can try that next time I'm on holiday somewhere, right? It's that level of inspiration. So send me your images, go for it, and tell me about the image so that we can explain when I show the images how this one was created, or any interesting little anecdotes about it. Okay, so that's for 2 weeks' time. Next week is a feedback session, okay? So this is your chance to get direct feedback on your own images, okay? So if you would like feedback, try and send them. I have space for 3, 4 at a real push. But first come, first served. Send me your image, tell me where your sticking point is, and I will do my best to give you decent feedback and help to get you past whatever your sticking point is with your photo. It really is the best way to increase your understanding about photography, because we have our own blind spots. We can see quite easily sometimes where somebody else has gone wrong with their photo. We find it extraordinarily difficult to understand why our own ones aren't working. So this is your chance, professional photographer, and we will look at it. So get those into me next week. Again, absolutely no later than Friday, in this case, Friday the 19th. Marcy says, I put my bass amp on its back and the camera on the springy mesh speaker cover with a 2-second exposure. I let my bass guitar vibrate the camera. The result was like a waveform. Wow, now that sounds interesting. Okay, send us an example. Send us an example, Marcy. If you want to put one like that in for the challenge, then we'll see it in 2 weeks. If you just want to send me an example, actually, and I'm doing the feedback session next week, I can put a little snapshot of that in and we can talk about it just as a little reminder for 2 weeks as well. Right, oh, Susan says, clever idea, Marcy. And Rhoda says, great challenge idea. Okay, cool. Right, so I think that basically brings us to an end. If you haven't done so already, please click the like down here. And like I say, don't forget about the idea of the Substack newsletter. Sign up to that, because if anything disappears here or anything like that, at least I can get hold of you and let you know what's going on. Right, I think that's us. So thank you to everybody who's turned up. Thank you to Janet for coming up with the idea. I hope you found it inspiring, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Bye-bye.